Tutorial. That's it. Just one singular word that is defined as the stepping stone to teach newbies how to do something. But this mysterious game takes that word one step further. In fact, multiple steps further. In this video, I am going to summarize my first playthrough of Tutorial, as well as interpret the lore of what might be the most confusing game on Roblox. I'm the Epic User, and let's get it. I was searching through my For You page on Roblox when I stumbled across this game with a simple and mundane word, Tutorial. With no description and no context, I decided to try it out and see what could possibly be in store for me. When you enter the game, you are first greeted with a peaceful plain of grass with two trees, a windmill, and what seems to be a railroad. Just from looking at this landscape, you wouldn't think that this game would hold anything worthwhile, much less for lore videos such as this one. But I knew better. I knew there was a reason why this game had no description, why this game only had one singular mundane title. The entire setup of this game already felt extremely suspicious. I walked around the grassy landscape, looking at the simple setting of the game. Eventually I stepped onto the stairs in front of the railroad tracks, and all of a sudden, it turned nighttime. The birds stopped chirping, the windmill stopped turning, and the two lamp lights in front of the railroad emitted an ominous glow. At that moment, I realized that my suspicions were correct. Then all of a sudden, it was daytime again. Everything got back to normal, except for the fact that there's now an odd gray sphere floating around. If you approach and click on it, you will receive random dialogue from the sphere. I was quite unsure whether or not the dialogue actually meant something, and I knew there just had to be more, so I kept clicking and clicking, and clicking, and clicking. All this sphere had to say were vague words that essentially don't mean anything, until it said this. This was the first time in a long while that I actually saw something somewhat meaningful from the sphere, and so I had to write it down. Not too long after, the sphere said something like this again, but this time it had new numbers, and so I wrote those down too. Let me know down in the comment section whether or not anything the sphere had said meant anything. Eventually, it felt like the sphere went back to talking nonsense, and so I stopped approaching it. However, what caught my eye next was interesting. There was a hanging apple on this particular tree that I never saw prior to the game turning nighttime. Curious, I went up to it, and sure enough, I was able to grab it. But in doing so, the world turned dark again. When my surroundings got clearer, I found myself in a dark and totally not ominous forest. Suddenly I felt goosebumps rising on my arms and shoulders, as now, this is part of the game where I knew that with steadfast certainty, it is more than meets the eye. At the beginning of the path you can see a gravestone. I have no idea what this gravestone could possibly mean, but I will list my interpretations of it later in the video. At this point, the only way to keep progressing is to keep moving forward, therefore continuing on the path. Eventually, the path dissolves into a clearing in the forest, with a single leafless tree stump at the center. When you get closer to it, you will see dialogue coming from the stump. Dialogue that actually holds somewhat of a substance, unlike the previous dialogue we've seen from the sphere. It is so cold, yet I could wait here for hours. I feel better not being. I sit and enjoy nothing. But then the dialogue ends with a strange final phrase. What is wrong? This dialogue could mean a variety of things, and I'll state my interpretations of it as well as its possible lore later in the video. Suddenly, the sun returned, and the entire forest disappeared as if it was never there. The only thing that signified that the forest once existed was the stump that remained. I looked around at the grass plain around me until I found a human structure in the distance, along with some more trees. The structure was an abandoned cabin with a path leading towards the front door. I went inside, and the only two things that could be found was a chair and a single rose laying on top of it. It's unknown whether or not the cabin actually represents something deeper, but I'll determine its lore later in this video. The moment you take the rose, you are instantly greeted with dialogue on the top of your screen, welcoming you to whatever world you've got yourself into. When you head out of the cabin, you see an electrical pole at the end of the path that you've never seen before when first entering the stage. Once you approach the pole instantly disappears and the same mysterious text from before offers to give you a tutorial. You are then given a choice to either do this mysterious tutorial or not. I pressed yes, but later on, I'll show you what happens if you press no, so make sure to stick around until the end for that. Once you click yes, your avatar will then get dragged to a strange looking statue that looks like it has no head. Right after, you get teleported to a dark stone maze-like looking environment with highly distorted sounds playing in the background. As you approach the end of the corridor, the text tells you to make a right. I didn't bother turning left and defying the tutorial, so for those of you who already play the game, comment below what happens if you do turn left. When you make a right, the text leads you towards a door that leads to a very dark room. Eventually, I found my way through the darkness and out of the room where I can see the same plane of grass from before, just at the end of the dark stone maze. But before I could reach it, the text ordered me to stop, and against my will, my avatar stopped moving. The text then said that was all I had to do, and told me to follow the steps. I got teleported back to the start of the stone maze, and still followed exactly what the text told me to do. However, once I reached the door, instead of leading me to a room, I got teleported to a completely different stage, an environment with a pure white background and a single bridge for me to cross to reach a singular tree at the end. So far, this game has piqued my interest, despite originally looking like a Roblox game made by a child developer that used pre-made assets. As you cross the bridge, the log from the tree at the end would approach me, quite fast I should say, and start talking. The log states that the place I'm in is apparently where things go wrong. It then assures me that soon I will go to a place where everything is right. I didn't know what the log meant by wrong and right places, but I'll go over what they could mean later in the video. Just as I'm about to make it across the bridge, the log came to me and said a very crucial rule. But when something goes wrong in a place that is right, it is a mistake, and you have to fix it. This rule would later on play a major role in the plot of this game. I kept moving forward until I reached a logless tree and found a glowing green pot hidden under the leaves. Once you click this green pot, you then get teleported to another stage. This is where the pinnacle of this game's confusing mechanics as well as its weirdness comes into play. You're supposed to navigate through this strange dimension using a very weird camera angle, almost as if you are the unseen observer while your avatar is a completely different entity. It took me a while to progress since I wasn't used to these never-before-seen mechanics, but eventually, once you have traversed far enough, you'll see a never-ending row of structures containing rooms, and you have to enter through all of them. After a while, you reach the final room, and the only thing that's in the center is a glass vase on top of a table. I knocked it down thinking that it would help me progress, and it did. However, later on, I'll come to regret this decision. You will then get teleported to another stage with winding corridors and rooms that are all the same color of gray. After seeing a red button that's interactable, I immediately knew the goal of this stage, and after finding the first button, I tried finding the next one. As I walked through endless hallways, I eventually found the next red one. However, through sheer curiosity, I decided to keep venturing through the rooms, and eventually the stage pushed me completely out of the gray rooms and corridors and into a different place. This stage essentially has the same properties as the last one, but with more colors. Wow, totally different, am I right? This green path caught my eye, and as I went towards the end of it, I clicked on the interactable part. After you would click on this part, you would then teleport, man, we're really teleporting a lot, huh? To wake up in another stage. Long story short, let's just say this is by far the most beautiful yet weirdest stage in the entirety of this game so far. This kind of reminds me of the Taj Mahal in India. If you traverse far enough in this stage, you eventually see a descending magical staircase to help you ascend to a higher level within this stage. After wandering around the roof for a bit, you'll see the same electrical pole you saw before in the cabin stage. Approach it, and you'll get teleported to what appears to be a lab-like structure. Peer through the window on your right, and you'll see an endless amount of floating islands with weirdly placed trees. Yeah, as if this game isn't already weird enough. Eventually, you have to make your way out of a maze. But this is no ordinary maze, because every time you move your camera at a slight angle, the maze disappears, but you still run into unseen walls. Because of this annoying mechanic, it took me 1,000 years just for me to finally reach the other side. After walking across a very narrow strip of land, I approached the door, and through trying to open it, you would then teleport back to one of the earlier stages. Lo and behold, it's the same glass vase that we knocked down in the final repeating room. The text that offered us a tutorial from before then guilt trips us into trying to fix the mistake, since remember, a crucial rule in this game is to not make any mistakes in the world of right. If you do make a mistake there, then you must fix it. And that's exactly what the text is trying to get me to do, to fix the mistake I made. Eventually, the screen goes black, and we are back at it again in the stone maze from way earlier. I still followed the exact instructions that the text wanted me to do, but this time when I approached the same stone corridor that the plane of grass is just on the other side of, there was no text to stop me, no unseen force to restrict my avatar against my will. I was finally free, wandering around the plane at last. Eventually, if you walk far enough, you'll see a single button attached to absolutely nothing, as well as a grey platform under the button. I pressed it, and then a cutscene proceeded to play. It shows the same first stage that we spawned in when we first logged into the game, except this time it's getting overtaken by a dust storm. The trees are all knocked down, the railroad is half buried in sand, and the windmill is spinning violently. Then suddenly, we see the same sphere again from before, and it approaches the same headless statue that dragged our avatar. And this is where one of the most important dialogue, if not the most important dialogue, takes place. The sphere started saying to the statue how it used to feel so nice not being, and that it wants to go back. It then started pleading to the statue to send it back to wherever it wanted to be. Eventually, the sandstorm disappeared, and it seems like from the last moments of screen time we can see of both the entities, the ball is getting attached to where the statue's head is supposed to be. The screen goes black, and we get an award for completing the game. This piece of dialogue, as I've said earlier, is very important to discuss later on in the video, so make sure to stick around. Remember back in the earlier stages when the text gave us two options to either allow it to give us the tutorial or not? I have already covered what happens if you say yes, and now I will cover what happens if you say no. Upon answering no, the last ominous thing that we see from the text is this. Very well. We then get teleported to some savanna-looking environment. Eventually, we arrive at what appears to be a laboratory building. After solving quite a bit of puzzles, we then try solving this puzzle. But while trying to solve the final puzzle, the same text from before came back and questions us if there's anything wrong. The text then proceeds to gaslight us into thinking that this puzzle was part of the tutorial, even though it wasn't. The screen suddenly went black, and we then got teleported to a very dark forest. For its final words, the text says, "There could have been so much more, but you cannot know the rest. So accept, some things are meant to happen." The last thing that we see before we die is a very tall monstrous figure with eyes as pitch dark as the forest around us, screaming and running at us, almost as if it's scolding us for not completing the tutorial first. This game, despite looking extremely simple on my Roblox For You page, has actual layers and depth that even I cannot fully interpret. It's incredibly ambiguous with no clear direction to go off of other than some pieces of dialogue, but even so, there are some implications that we can make. The gravestone that we saw from earlier didn't mean anything at first, but as the game progressed, I finally was able to interpret the meaning behind the gravestone. It could possibly mean that the main character has already died. Okay, but what is so interesting about the protag dying? Well, there's actually some context behind this. The talking tree stump that we saw at the end of the path talks about it being cold, but also saying how it could just wait here for hours and enjoys nothing. This probably represents the inner consciousness of the protag's soul, thinking how good it feels to stay dead. If the protag is enjoying being dead too much, it implies that the protag must have hated their life, or at least had a motivator to possibly make him unalive himself. Later on, this reason will get revealed. As for the cabin that we saw in one of the stages, that becomes a bit more ambiguous. The cabin could represent the place where the protag used to live in, and also the place where the protag died. The rose on the table could mean many things, but due to the context of the protag possibly dying, the flower represents mourning for the dead. The rose could represent a sort of memorial for the main character. In fact, this only makes more sense that the protag died when we pick up the rose and the text welcomes us to the world. That is one of the clearest signs that a person is transitioning from one world to the next, or rather, from one plane of existence to the next. Within the context of the protag dying, the text welcoming us represents our ascension to the afterlife. As for the concept of wrong and right places being introduced in this game, that lies the most probable reason why the protag wanted to end their life. The wrong and the right worlds are a conception made up by the main character's mind that manifested after some big mistake they had made back when they were alive. What happened when they were alive was that they probably had done something extremely fatal that they could not forgive themselves for, up to the point where they're willing to unalive themselves and enjoy nothing. The game further reinforces this through guilt-tripping us to fix the mistake of knocking over the glass vase. It's simply just knocking over a vase. However, because of the main character's underlying trauma, the mistake becomes a lot more than just a mistake. As for what mistake the protag could have made, we don't know for sure. The game is a bit too mysterious to decide something as specific as that. Now you might be thinking that if the wrong and right places are just a manifestation of the protag's trauma, then what's the deal with choosing whether or not to complete the tutorial? Honestly, I do not have a certain answer for that, but judging from the context of the protag dying, we can infer that saying yes to the tutorial represents our acceptance that we are now dead. Saying no infers that we do not accept being dead. The monster that chases us at the end of the game after we say no to the tutorial represents the protag's infinite despair of not accepting death while suffering from their trauma of what they did when they were alive. Since saying yes means that the protag accepts being dead, they are then moved on to the afterlife, hence the weird yet vast surroundings we will then see. But even after saying yes, what's the big idea about the dialogue we saw coming from the sphere at the very end of the game? At the end of the game, after you said yes to the tutorial, we see a cutscene between the sphere from the first stage and the headless statue. The sphere could represent numerous things that I probably didn't even know, but now that we've established the context, we can infer that the sphere is most likely the manifestation of the dead protagonist's consciousness. Throughout the entire game, it has a recurring theme. It's better to enjoy nothing and stop being. This is exactly the mindset that the sphere embodies, since it kept begging to the statue for it to go back to being nothing. And since we already know that the protagonist is the one that matches that exact mindset, it can only make sense that the sphere is an extension of the protag. However, we're not sure as to what the sphere meant by it wanting to be nothing again. Even though the mindset of it is the same as the protag, we are given little clues as to what the sphere meant by wanting to go back. Perhaps it represented the consciousness of the protagonist wanting to go back to the times in the afterlife before it made the mistake of breaking the glass vase, before the protag had to worry about its own trauma. The breaking of the vase triggered the underlying trauma that the protag gained from when they were alive, and because it triggered the trauma, the protag no longer found the freedom that it once enjoyed in being dead. As for the headless statue, I have no idea why the sphere has to beg towards it specifically. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section. This game started as a very simple concept that showcases a tutorial for the game's mechanics, and ended with a message about depression, the taking of one's life, and what happens beyond death. In conclusion, the Roblox game tutorial is secretly a game about a person who has done something catastrophic in their lives, something so fatal that they could not forgive themselves for it for the rest of their life, and so they took their life hoping to ease their pain and be free, only to find out that their trauma can carry on, even in the afterlife. But just because you have done something horrible in your life, that doesn't mean the action alone defines who you are. Life is full of opportunities, both good and bad ones. What matters is not what we have done, but rather what we decide to do next to be a better person. The best you can do is treat your past actions as a lesson, and apply those lessons to move on. Thank you for watching, everyone. I am forever grateful if you have watched the entire video from start to finish. What do you think of my take for this game? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments section. If you like content like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. And remember to stay epic!